Most people think wars are fought with tanks, missiles, and soldiers. But what if I told you the real war of our lifetime isn't being fought on the battlefield? It is being fought in banks, code and currency ledgers. History teaches us that money has always been the hidden battlefield. When nations rise and fall, it isn't just because of weapons, it's because of who controls the money. The Roman Empire collapsed when its currency was debased. The British Empire lost its edge when the pound lost reserve status. And in the 20th century, America cemented global dominance not through armies alone, but through the dollar. The dollar became the reserve currency of the world, the oil-backed backbone of global trade, and the invisible weapon that gave the US unmatched leverage. But today, the dollar's power is being tested like never before. Inflation, endless debt, political dysfunction, and sanctions have created cracks in the system. Countries around the globe are looking for alternatives. Trust in the dollar isn't absolute anymore. And in geopolitics, the moment trust fades, rivals rush in to fill the gap. Enter the race for the future, digital currencies. Over 130 nations are now testing or launching CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. China's digital yuan is already live in pilot programs across Asia. Europe is preparing the digital euro. The US is debating the digital dollar. And dozens of smaller nations are experimenting with their own blockchain-based money. This isn't just technology, it's power. The nation that dominates the next financial standard will control trade, energy, commodities, and global influence for decades to come. This is the new Cold War, not over nuclear weapons, but over digital money. But here's the problem. Every country is racing to build its own system. The US wants the digital dollar to secure its influence. China wants the digital yuan to challenge dollar dominance. Europe wants independence with the digital euro. Each one is building in isolation, creating walls, borders, and division in the financial system. And here's the question no one is asking. If every nation builds its own digital money, how do they talk to each other? How do you send value across borders in seconds when the systems don't connect? That's where the story turns, because in the middle of this global race is a single asset that was designed not to compete, but to connect. Not to dominate, but to bridge. XRP. While the world is distracted by lawsuits, headlines, and short-term price speculation, XRP has been aligning itself with the future of finance. ISO 2022 compliance, real-time settlement, tokenized assets, and the rails for central bank money. Unlike the dollar or the yuan, it isn't tied to a nation. It isn't political. It's neutral infrastructure. And that neutrality could make it the most valuable weapon of all. Not a weapon of destruction, but of connection. Think about it. If CBDCs spread across the world but can't connect, trade breaks down. Supply chains stall, tensions rise, currency wars flare into real wars. But if there's a neutral bridge, an asset that links dollars, euros, yuan, and more, then money keeps moving. Trade flows, stability holds, and the spark for global conflict is dampened before it ignites. This is the story you're not supposed to hear. While Bitcoin is treated as digital gold and meme coins grab attention, XRP is quietly positioning itself as the backbone of the new financial order, not by chasing hype, but by solving the single most important problem of the digital age: connection. The truth is simple. If the 20th century was shaped by the dollar, the 21st may be shaped by digital bridges, and XRP is first in line. So before we dive into the fall of the dollar, the rise of CBDCs, the supply shock setup, and the future of money without borders, you need to understand this. The real war isn't about bombs. It's about who controls the money. And XRP may be the quiet force that decides how this war is won. Like, subscribe, and share, because the deeper you go into this series, the clearer the truth becomes. XRP isn't just a coin. It's the bridge to the future of money. Part 1. The death of the dollar. Standard. Every empire in history has had its backbone, and in modern times that backbone has always been money. For the last 80 years, that money has been the US dollar. But just like the Roman denarius or the British pound before it, no currency reigns forever. And today, cracks are forming in the dollar standard that could reshape the entire global order. And how the dollar took over at the end of World War II, the world was in ruins. The United States, with its intact economy and gold reserves, stepped in as the anchor of global trade. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, pegging global currencies to the dollar, and the dollar to gold. This made the US dollar the world's reserve currency. the foundation of international trade. When the US left the gold standard in the 1970s, the system should have collapsed. But Washington struck a deal with Saudi Arabia and OPEC. Oil would be priced in dollars. This created the petrodollar system, forcing every nation to hold dollars just to buy energy. From there, the dollar wasn't just America's currency, it became the world's currency. For decades, this gave the US immense power. Every country needed dollars for trade. Every bank used dollars as reserves. And when nations stepped out of line, the US could weaponize its financial system through sanctions, effectively cutting them off from global commerce. The cracks in the system, but here's the problem: no system lasts forever. And the dollar's dominance is now facing serious threats: inflation and debt. America's debt has crossed $34 trillion, and inflation is eating away at purchasing power. The dollar doesn't feel like a safe haven the way it used to. Sanctions overreach the U.S. has used sanctions as a weapon so often that rivals are now building alternative systems to escape dollar control. Global shifts. Rising powers like China, India, and Russia don't want to depend on the dollar. They're striking trade deals in their own currencies. Trust decline. From Argentina to Turkey to Nigeria, nations are losing trust in holding reserves tied to the U.S. In other words, the dollar standard is no longer seen as untouchable. The push for alternatives across the globe. New cracks are turning into full-blown fractures. BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are openly discussing a new currency system backed by commodities like gold. China is expanding the use of its digital yuan in Asia and Africa, bypassing the dollar in trade deals. Europe is building systems to reduce dependency on U.S. payment rails. Even U.S. allies are experimenting with settlements outside the dollar to avoid financial risk. The truth is, the world doesn't want to be trapped under the monopoly of a single nation as currency anymore. And as history shows, once nations start looking for alternatives, the dominoes fall quickly. What comes next? If the dollar loses reserve status, what replaces it? Some say the yuan, others say gold, some say a basket of commodities. But here's the flaw. No single national currency can replace the dollar without creating the same problem all over again. Whoever controls the currency controls the system. That's why the conversation is shifting toward digital assets, neutral, borderless currencies that aren't controlled by one government. Assets that can move value in seconds across any border without friction. And that's where XRP starts to enter the story. Because while the dollar fades, and while other nations scramble to create their own alternatives, XRP has been quietly aligning itself with the rails of the new financial order. ISO 2022 compliance, real-time settlement, interoperability with CBDCs, and tokenized assets. The big picture. The death of the dollar standard isn't science fiction. It's happening in real time. Trade deals are being signed without the dollar. Countries are openly defying U.S. sanctions. Inflation is eroding trust at home and abroad. The cracks are widening, and the world is searching for a replacement. That's the setup. The global reserve currency system is shifting under our feet, and the digital Cold War for control of money has already begun. But if every country launches its own digital currency, the problem doesn't go away. It gets worse. Instead of one reserve standard, the world risks splitting into currency blocks, each cut off from the other. That's not stability, that's chaos. Which brings us to the next chapter, the CBDC arms race. Because while the dollar weakens, the race for digital dominance is accelerating. Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive into the global CBDC arms race and why it could either fracture the world's financial system or set the stage for XRP to become the bridge that holds it together. Part 2, the CBDC arms race. If the dollar's dominance is cracking, what comes next? For the first time in history, the answer isn't another national currency or commodity-backed system. It's something far more radical. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. And right now, more than 130 countries are racing to launch them. This isn't just a trend. It's the financial equivalent of an arms race. Whoever builds the strongest, fastest, and most widely adopted digital currency will gain a massive advantage in global trade, politics, and power. The new weapons of finance. CBDCs are essentially digital versions of national currencies. But unlike cash or traditional bank money, they exist directly on central bank-controlled ledgers. That means your payments settle instantly. Governments have real-time oversight of money flows. Middlemen like SWIFT or correspondent banks can be bypassed. For central banks, this is revolutionary. Faster settlement means cheaper trade. Direct control means new levers for monetary policy. And the ability to bypass old systems means more independence from Western-dominated rails like SWIFT. China's digital yuan. The challenger China is leading the pack. Its digital yuan, ECNY, has already been piloted in dozens of cities, used for billions in transactions, and integrated into popular apps like WeChat and Alipay. Beijing is pushing it across Asia and into Africa through trade deals, creating an alternative to the dollar for cross-border payments. Make no mistake, the digital yuan isn't just about convenience, it's about breaking free from US dollar dominance. If China can convince enough nations to settle trade in ECNY, it chips away at the dollar's monopoly and shifts global influence eastward. By knowing Europe's digital euro. The middle ground, the European Union, is moving slower but just as seriously. The digital euro is in advanced planning, expected to launch within a few years. For Europe, this isn't just about catching up with technology, it's about sovereignty. The EU doesn't want to depend on American or Chinese rails for its financial future. By launching its own CBDC, Europe aims to protect its role in the global system, ensuring it won't be sidelined in the new era of money. The US and the digital dollar. The hesitant giant, the United States, ironically is behind. Why? Because the dollar already dominates. Washington fears that launching a digital dollar too fast could disrupt the existing financial system. But make no mistake, the conversation is happening. Pilot programs, FedNow, and political debates are heating up. The risk for America is clear. If it moves too slowly, others will build the new rails first. And in this kind of race, being late means losing influence. The danger of fragmentation here is the problem. If every nation builds its own digital currency in isolation, the world risks fragmenting into currency blocks. A Chinese block powered by the digital yuan, a European block powered by the digital euro, an American block powered by the digital dollar, dozens of smaller nations tied to one sphere or another. Instead of one global standard, the world could fracture into competing systems, each with its own rules, rails, and power struggles. That's not progress. That's chaos. And chaos in global finance has historically led to conflict. The missing piece. What the world needs isn't just faster currencies, it's interoperability. A way for all these CBDCs to talk to each other, trade with each other, and move value seamlessly across borders. Without that, CBDCs will only deepen division. And that's where XRP enters the picture. Unlike national currencies, XRP is neutral. It isn't tied to the US, China, or Europe. It was built to be the bridge asset, able to connect any currency, digital or traditional, in seconds. CBDCs may be the future of money, but without a bridge, they're useless outside their borders. XRP is designed to be that bridge. How's big picture? The CBDC arms race isn't just about efficiency, it's about survival. Nations know the next reserve system is being built right now. Whoever controls the rails controls the world. But the irony is, the only way to avoid chaos may be to rely on something that no one nation owns. That's the paradox of the digital Cold War. Nations are competing for control, but the solution may be neutrality. Which brings us to the next chapter, XRP's role as the neutral bridge. Because as the dollar weakens and CBDCs rise, the world will need a connector. And XRP is already sitting in position. Stay tuned for part 3. Where we dive into how XRP, built for speed, scalability, and neutrality, could quietly become the backbone of global settlement in the digital age. Part 3. XRP, the neutral bridge. We've seen how the dollar's dominance is fading. We've seen how nations are racing to launch CBDCs. But now we arrive at the critical question: how do all these systems actually connect? Because the truth is simple. Digital money without interoperability is useless outside its borders. And that's where XRP steps in. The bridge problem. Imagine a world where the US has a digital dollar, China has a digital yuan, Europe has a digital euro, and dozens of smaller nations each have their own CBDCs. That sounds advanced, until you try to send value between them. Without a universal bridge, the system fragments. The digital yuan can't instantly convert into the digital dollar. The euro can't seamlessly settle with the yen. Trade slows. Liquidity dries up. The world divides into closed-off financial blocks, each competing for dominance. That's not efficiency. It's financial Cold War 2.0. The missing piece is clear. The world doesn't just need digital money. It needs a neutral settlement layer, a bridge that can connect every currency, every blockchain, every system. Why XRP is built for this? Unlike most cryptocurrencies, XRP wasn't designed as a speculative asset or a decentralized science experiment. It was engineered from the ground up to solve one specific problem: global settlement. Here's why XRP fits the role. Speed. Transactions settle in 3 to 5 seconds. No waiting days like with SWIFT.
Scalability. The XRP ledger can process thousands of transactions per second.
Cost. Fees are a fraction of a cent, making it practical for retail payments and institutional transfers alike. Neutrality. XRP isn't tied to any one government. It's not the dollar, not the yuan, not the euro. It's neutral infrastructure. ISO 2022. Ready. XRP is already aligned with the global standard banks are adopting for financial messaging. In short, XRP is the connector the world didn't realize it needed. While XRP and CBDC central banks know their CBDCs will be limited without interoperability. Some countries may try to build direct corridors with each other, but that doesn't scale. You can't make thousands of one-to-one connections across the globe. The only scalable solution is a hub-and-spoke model, where every CBDC connects to a neutral bridge asset. That's XRP's sweet spot. Instead of China trying to connect its yuan to 100 different currencies, it can connect once through XRP and settle instantly with any other currency in the system. This makes XRP not a competitor to CBDCs, but a complement. The CBDCs represent sovereign money. XRP is the neutral glue that binds them together. At the institutional shift for years, XRP was held back by the SEC lawsuit. But with that cloud gone, institutions are no longer afraid to move in. Custodians are setting up infrastructure. Banks are exploring rails built on or connected to the XRP ledger. And exchanges are seeing XRP supplies drain as coins move into cold storage and institutional custody. This isn't hype, it's positioning. The same way the internet quietly became the backbone of communication, XRP is quietly positioning itself as the backbone of value transfer. Beyond CBDCs, tokenization. XRP's role doesn't stop with CBDCs. The XRP ledger can also host tokenized assets, representations of stocks, bonds, commodities, real estate, and more. That means XRP can connect not just currencies, but entire asset classes. Picture a future where a bond in Europe settles against a commodity in Africa in seconds, all bridged by XRP. That's not theory. That's the kind of efficiency institutions are building toward. The big picture: XRP isn't here to dominate. It's here to connect. And in a fractured world, neutrality is its greatest weapon. The US dollar can't be the global bridge anymore. Neither can the yuan or the euro. But XRP, with its speed, scalability, and neutrality, can. This is why so many dismiss XRP at their own risk. They're looking for the next hype coin, while XRP is aligning with the next financial system. But here's the kicker. If XRP becomes the backbone of global settlement, demand skyrockets. And with limited supply, that leads us straight into one of the most explosive setups in financial history. But stay tuned for part 4, where we dive into the supply shock setup and why shrinking exchange supply plus rising institutional demand could trigger XRP's most dramatic move yet. Part 4, the supply shock setup. We've seen how the dollar's dominance is fading. We've seen how CBDCs are rising. And we've seen how XRP sits in the middle as the neutral bridge. But here is where it gets explosive. Because even the best technology in the world doesn't matter if supply and demand don't line up. And right now, XRP is setting up for one of the most powerful supply shocks we've ever seen in finance. It's a fixed supply in a growing system. Unlike fiat currencies, XRP isn't infinite. Its supply is capped at 100 billion tokens, with over 99% already created. There's no central bank printing button, no endless inflation lever. What exists today is what the world has to work with. Now think about that in the context of global finance. If XRP becomes the backbone for CBDCs, tokenized assets, and institutional settlement, trillions of dollars in value could move across rails powered by a token with a fixed supply. That's the perfect recipe for a supply crunch. Taiwan leaving exchanges for years, XRP traded like any other coin, back and forth on retail exchanges. But since the SEC case cleared, something has changed. Supplies on exchanges are shrinking. Coins are leaving trading platforms and moving into custody. Why? Because institutions don't want to gamble on exchanges. They want control, security, and long-term access. That means XRP is being taken off the open market and locked away in cold storage, custodial services, and institutional vaults. Every coin that leaves an exchange is one less coin available for retail traders. And when supply tightens while demand rises, prices move fast. Institutional demand ramping up. At the same time that supply is shrinking, demand is quietly increasing. Custodians are onboarding XRP. Banks are testing systems built on or connected to the XRP ledger. Payment companies are preparing corridors, and investors who once avoided XRP due to regulatory uncertainty are now free to step in. This isn't loud. It isn't hyped. It's happening behind the scenes. The kind of quiet accumulation that precedes explosive moves. In the coiled spring here is how the setup looks. Fixed supply. No new XRP can be printed. Shrinking exchange balances. Coins leaving retail platforms for custody. Rising institutional demand. Banks, custodians, and funds positioning for the future. Macro shifts, dollar weakness, CBDC adoption, and tokenization trends all pointing toward a new financial backbone. Put those pieces together and you get a classic financial pattern, the coiled spring. Pressure builds slowly, invisibly. Nothing seems to move until it suddenly does. And when it releases, the move is violent, fast, and undeniable. By lessons from history, we've seen supply shocks before. Gold supply shocks sent prices soaring when nations abandoned the gold standard. Oil shocks in the 1970s reshaped the global economy overnight. In each case, scarcity collided with demand, and prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Now imagine the same dynamic in a digital asset with global settlement potential. XRP isn't just another commodity. It's a tool designed to power the plumbing of finance itself. If institutions decide they need XRP to settle trillions in global value, the demand wave will collide with a shrinking pool of available supply. And when that happens, the charts won't just move, they'll reset entirely. The big picture, this isn't about chasing hype. This is about recognizing the structure of the system. Supply is shrinking, demand is rising, and the use case is bigger than anything crypto has seen before. The irony? Most traders are too distracted to notice. They're chasing meme coins and short-term pumps while the real setup unfolds quietly. By the time the coiled spring releases, it'll be too late to position on what comes next. So what happens when the spring finally uncoils? What does the world look like when XRP isn't just a speculative asset, but the invisible engine of global settlement? That takes us into the final chapter, the vision of a financial system without borders. A world where CBDCs, tokenized assets, and digital money all move seamlessly on rails powered by XRP. Not speculation, not theory, but the actual architecture of the future. Stay tuned for Part 5, where we dive into the future of money and imagine what a borderless world powered by XRP truly looks like. Part 5, the future of money. A world without borders. Imagine a world where value moves as easily as information, where a farmer in Kenya can sell crops to a buyer in Europe and receive payment instantly, where a Japanese investor can purchase a US stock and settle the trade in seconds, where a machine in Germany can pay another machine in Brazil fractions of a cent for data, automatically, without middlemen. That world isn't science fiction. It's the logical next step in the evolution of money, and at the center of it is XRP. Now, the architecture of a borderless system for centuries, money has been chained by borders. Gold had to be shipped across oceans. Dollars had to move through correspondent banks. Even digital systems like SWIFT still crawl through layers of intermediaries. But blockchain technology changes everything. With CBDCs and tokenized assets, we can digitize the foundation of finance itself. Dollars, euros, yen, yuan, bonds, commodities, all represented as tokens that can move at internet speed. But tokens alone aren't enough. You need a universal bridge that makes them interoperable. That's where XRP comes in. The XRP ledger is built to connect, to settle value across any currency or asset in seconds, to become the invisible highway that every digital asset travels on. Tokenization at scale. Think about the scale of tokenization. Analysts estimate that by 2030, hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets could be tokenized. Real estate, equities, bonds, commodities, intellectual property. Even a fraction of that value flows through systems connected by XRP. Demand for the bridge asset will surge, not because of speculation, but because the system requires it to function. Just like oil fueled the 20th century economy, liquidity bridges like XRP will fuel the 21st century digital economy, where peace through connection. There's a deeper layer here too. For decades, wars have been fought over money, trade, and resources. But what if money itself was no longer a weapon of division? If every country builds its own CBDC, the world risks fracturing into financial blocks. But if they're all connected through a neutral bridge like XRP, trade keeps flowing, liquidity keeps moving, tensions ease. XRP won't stop politics or power struggles, but it could remove one of the greatest sparks of conflict: broken money. The same way the internet reduced barriers to communication, XRP could reduce barriers to value, from invisible to indispensable. The irony is that when XRP does its job, most people won't even notice. Just like few people think about the internet protocols that move data, few will think about the asset moving value. But behind the scenes, XRP will be indispensable. The invisible engine that powers commerce, trade, and digital assets worldwide. When CBDCs settle instantly, when tokenized stocks trade in real time, when machines pay each other seamlessly, it won't be because of hype coins or speculative fads. It will be because XRP quietly made the system work. Cause big picture, the future of money is borderless. CBDCs will digitize currencies. Tokenization will digitize assets. But only XRP can connect them all into one seamless flow. This is the role XRP was built for, not as a meme, not as hype, but as the bridge. And what comes next? We've walked through the fall of the dollar, the rise of CBDCs, the bridge role of XRP, and the supply shock setup. Now we've seen the vision, a borderless financial system powered by connection, not division. But there's one final piece. We need to step back and look at the entire story: the death of the old system, the birth of the new, and the bridge that ties them together. Because when history looks back, it won't just remember the wars, the currencies, or the politics. It will remember the moment money itself was redefined. Stay tuned for the outro, where we bring everything together and reveal why XRP may be remembered not as a coin, but as the turning point in the future of global finance. Outro, the bridge to the future. We've taken a journey from the fall of the dollar standard to the global arms race for CBDCs, to XRP's role as the neutral bridge, the looming supply shock, and the vision of a borderless financial system. And now it's time to bring it all together. In the death of the old system, every empire is defined by its money. Rome had the denarius, Britain had the pound, America had the dollar. Each one believed its reign would last forever, and each one fell when the world changed. The dollar is still powerful, but cracks are forming. Inflation, debt, sanctions, and the rise of rivals are eroding trust. Nations are no longer willing to accept a single monopoly over money. History tells us this moment was inevitable. Reserve currencies don't last forever. The birth of the new into that vacuum steps the most ambitious shift in financial history: the rise of digital money. Central bank digital currencies, tokenized assets, real-time settlement. For the first time, value itself is being digitized at scale. But left unchecked, this new system would fracture into chaos. A digital dollar here, a digital yuan there, dozens of CBDCs competing for influence. That's not stability, that's division. The very cracks that could spark conflict all over again. XRP, the neutral bridge. And this is where XRP enters as the turning point. Neutral, borderless, aligned with ISO 2022. Designed not to dominate, but to connect. XRP doesn't care if you're America, China, or Europe. It doesn't play politics. It doesn't belong to one nation. It exists to make every system interoperable, to keep the flow of value moving no matter how divided the world becomes. That neutrality is its strength. Because in a future where everyone wants control, the only solution is something no one controls. Then the supply shock at the same time, supply is tightening. Coins are leaving exchanges, moving into institutional custody. The SEC cloud has lifted. Custodians and banks are preparing infrastructure. And the demand that's coming isn't retail speculation. It's institutional necessity. When trillions in value move across a system powered by XRP, demand won't be optional. It will be structural. And with fixed supply, that creates one of the most explosive setups in financial history. The future without borders. So where does that leave us? With the vision we laid out, CBDCs flowing seamlessly, tokenized assets settling instantly, global trade without friction, Machines transacting in real time. A system where money is no longer a barrier but a bridge. And behind it all, quietly and visibly, XRP doing its job. Most people won't even notice. Just like we don't think about the internet protocols that move data, the world won't think about the rails moving money, but history will. The final word, the dollar defined the 20th century. The bridge will define the 21st. And when the history books are written, they may not remember the endless debates about decentralization, the lawsuits, or the speculation. They'll remember that at a critical moment, when the old system was breaking and the new was dividing, one asset held the world together. XRP wasn't just a coin. It wasn't just a bet. It was the bridge to the future of money. We like, subscribe, and share, because the future is being written right now. And here at LTL Productions, we'll keep bringing you the truth about XRP, digital assets, and the financial revolution that's already underway. This is not financial advice. Do your own research.